Coming up today in this episode of Shadow Talk, the React2Shell exploits flood the internet as attacks continue. ClickFix style attacks use Grok and ChatGPT for malware delivery. And a new ConsentFix attack hijacks Microsoft accounts via Azure CLI. Later, we'll cover the cyber risks during this holiday season and how organizations can protect themselves. I am your host, John Dilgen. Joining me is Ivan Righi, who is a Threat Intelligence Analyst at ReliaQuest, specializing in technical cyber threat research. Since joining ReliaQuest, he has focused on data breach investigations, automations, threat actor profiling, and reverse engineering threat campaigns. Ivan brings technical expertise and actionable insights to Shadow Talk. Welcome, Ivan. How are you doing today?
Hey, John. Doing great. Good to be back. How are you?
I'm doing very good. Glad to have you here and joining us. Jumping right into the news today, we're highlighting a story we highlighted a bit last week around React2Shell exploits that are now flooding the internet as attacks are continuing. I want to bring you some latest developments. Before we dive into those, I want to refresh our listeners' memory around what we covered last week. So there are two critical React vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 10, the highest possible score, that enable remote code execution in cloud environments via unsafe deserialization and React server components, affecting frameworks like Next.js. Exploitation requires only a crafted HTTP request and has already been observed being exploited in the wild, including by China-linked threat groups. The main reason that we're highlighting it this week is because of the scale at which these vulnerabilities are spreading, specifically the publicly available proof of concepts to recreate the exploitation. In this case, researchers have identified approximately 145 public-facing exploits. Notably, most of them fail to actually achieve exploitation and compromise the vulnerability, which is interesting. Also, the scale is interesting, and what this really tells us is that it's likely showing a trend of threat actors using AI to build these proof of concepts. I think it's really interesting to a report that we highlighted a few weeks ago around some of these dark LLM models, things like Worm GPT, and how they largely enable script kiddies to start, but ultimately are unable to create a lot of successful malware and exploitations. And this is likely an indication that many of these exploits are being used or being created through these dark LLM models. Ivan, is there anything particularly notable about these vulnerabilities in your opinion?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was notable to me is just how many different threat actors are exploiting it. It's been widely exploited to deploy crypto miners, info stealers, backdoors, and more. And these public exploits, they are used to deploy many different types of malware. And it has already been reported, like you said, that espionage groups from China and Iran are exploiting the vulnerability, and they're deploying backdoors and other types of malware. So as we can see, the POC has become very public very quickly, and this wave of attacks is happening also very quickly from many different threat actors with different sophistications. And that can make attribution difficult sometimes, but also it makes the likelihood of exploitation higher when all of these POCs are being published, even if, like you said, a lot of them are not actually real POCs, fake, or maybe they are fake POCs for the purpose of spreading malware. But it definitely makes it so that we have less time to actually get these vulnerabilities mitigated before exploitation happens. So I definitely want to watch out for defenders.
Yeah, it really is. And the scale around this is what's so worrying. Like we mentioned, many of the exploits are not leading anywhere, ultimately not able to execute, but there are quite a few that are successful. And one of the most worrying trends around many of these exploits is they include two features within them. Number one is the potential to bypass web application firewalls, essentially getting around those network edge devices, allowing the threat actors to ultimately exploit these vulnerabilities, steal that data, and or deploy ransomware. And in a similar vein, the other aspect is that many of them include automated vulnerability scanning to detect through what is publicly facing what organizations have and if they are vulnerable to these exploits. And I want to call back to some of our research that we've theorized that many of these successful ransomware groups, like the top players like Quillen and Clop, for example, are using these automated scanners to help drive their campaigns and their success, ultimately pairing that with automated exploitation, as we can likely see in this case with AI being used to generate many of these scripts.
Yeah, and with AI, one of the things is, like you said, a lot of these exploits at the moment, they were AI generated and they are just not functional. But it's only probably a matter of time before AI continues to improve and these exploits do become functional more often than not. And as AI becomes better, another thing kind of mentioned earlier is that the time that it takes for us, the defenders, to actually mitigate these vulnerabilities, the time available to us is going to get smaller and smaller. And we also are going to have to leverage these capabilities such as AI to protect ourselves. So it really is means that the time for us is getting shorter, and we need to act faster to be able to keep up with these vulnerabilities. As we can see in this case, it was only like a couple of weeks, and now we have hundreds of POCs and different threat actors exploiting it for different reasons.
So, Ivan, what can organizations do to defend themselves?
Yeah, so first things first is patching. There are patches available for these vulnerabilities. So all organizations should patch as soon as possible. It's also ideal to kind of focus on a defense in depth approach. So that includes verifying your web protections, like John said, web application firewalls, bot filters, and input validation. Also be on the lookout for things like unexpected outbound connections, DNS lookups to odd domains, CPU spikes on servers that shouldn't be busy, or maybe like a new admin account that was created that nobody requested. So these are good things to be on the lookout for. And finally, there's also a lot of indicators of compromise linked to this campaign. So threat hunts can and should be performed on these to identify any potential exploitation that happened in the past. Do you have anything else, John?
No, those are some great recommendations. You covered them all pretty well. Moving on to the next story, and actually the next two stories both highlight evolutions in ClickFix, a social engineering tactic often tied with phishing and search engine optimization poisoning to trick users into downloading malware. For reminders for our users, for our listeners, ClickFix is that social engineering method that essentially works by displaying a error message on the page, ultimately using copy paste abuse to trick the user into copying out commands and executing them to download malware. Our first story highlights ClickFix now using Grok and ChatGPT for malware delivery. Ivan, how are they doing this?
Yeah, so I thought this one was really, really interesting. A lot of people trust AI to solve their technical problems that they encounter. So then they will Google that information, and they may not think twice about what they find on there. So what the threat actors in this case are doing is that they are creating these fake AI responses using, let's say, ChatGPT or Grok, and they are going to copy this response, and then you use search engine optimization to make sure that these pop up at the very top when you search for a problem. So let's say that your computer's having an issue, and you Google that issue, and then you click on the first link, and it's an answer from ChatGPT. And that answer tells you to take a command and copy that command in your terminal, and then you follow those instructions. And as soon as you do, your computer is suddenly infected with malware. So what happened here is that the threat actor formulated that response, and that command in the AI response is something that they injected, but it's a malicious command that connects to the threat actor's server and downloads malware. And that they're sharing these AI answers in, let's say, these sites that users are asking questions about problems that they're having with their computer, so that people will click on this, they think it's legitimate, and then they input that command. And what makes this kind of successful too is that the answer is coming from a legitimate website. So from the eye test, it comes from a legitimate ChatGPT website. It solves a problem. It's very detailed. The only thing wrong is that one command there, but if you don't look very deeply, it passes all the eye exam tests. So it looks legitimate to most users, and really kind of forces us to shift our perspective of what we identify as safe, because just because it's coming from a legitimate website doesn't necessarily mean it's legitimate, such as ChatGPT in this example.
Yeah, that's really a great call out. And especially because, to give our listeners some perspective, traditionally we see ClickFix hosted in compromised domains or quickly spun up domains. So there's a few more elements to that eye test for users to notice that they are on a phishing website. Whereas in this case, because it's that legitimate source, it's that much more likely to be executed by them. Really good call out here. So what are the goals that attackers are using this new method for?
So in this specific campaign, it was simply just to deploy some info stealers and steal credentials and crypto wallets. So the motive was financial for this campaign, but this new campaign, and they're calling it Click2Fix instead of ClickFix, it's potentially going to grow to become much more prevalent. And we definitely see that threat actors, we've seen it in the past. It happens once, threat actors hear about it, they read about it, and they start using it. So it's definitely going to be something that I can see becoming more scalable, especially because how simple it is to make. And instead of sending a phishing email to your victim, you can just create these solutions to problems that they're likely to search for, embed them malicious code into that, and then post it somewhere where they're likely to see it. And it makes it easy. You don't have to keep up with it. You don't have to keep sending phishing emails. You kind of just leave those answers in there. You post it into some help websites, and victims are going to come to you. So it's definitely see this becoming more popular in the long run, and something for security teams to be alert of.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, Ivan, because some other context around ClickFix is it happens to be one of the most successful malware delivery methods that we see against ReliaQuest customers. And also, when you look at the timeline of ClickFix over the last year, it has evolved to include so many different methods, which are also being successfully exploited. Things like fake CAPTCHA, for example, and file fix. Just it's had so many variations. So this particular ClickFix attack, as well as this new integration, will likely gain that similar traction. So, Ivan, how can organizations defend themselves?
I think in this case, two habits go a long way. The first one is don't copy and paste anything that you find on the web without verifying it. And if you do have a question for AI, you should ask that question yourself and find that solution yourself instead of having to take somebody else's solution, because you can never trust, because you can't see the previous commands or the previous questions and instructions given to AI to give that answer. So unless you ask that question yourself, you should be cautious of whatever that answer is. And then also be on the lookout for suspicious instructions, such as anything that requires you to copy and paste anything, such as a command in your terminal, unexpected prompts asking for passwords, and also unusual outbound requests. So these are also things to be on the lookout for. And then also, it's always good to have two-factor and strong passwords, and that can go a long way against some of these ClickFix campaigns.
Those are great recommendations. Next up in the news, as I mentioned, this one also pairs well with ClickFix. This one's being called ConsentFix, and it's hijacking Microsoft accounts via the Azure CLI. And what's interesting here is that where previously, as Ivan mentioned, we've seen ClickFix ask users to copy a command and paste that command so it can be executed to download malware. In this case, users are being asked to paste the login URL for their Microsoft accounts. And this includes session information that the attacker can then use to conduct man-in-the-middle attacks and ultimately harvest that login session for that user, gaining initial access in the environment through a valid account rather than malware delivery. And I think it's particularly interesting here that the last news story that we highlighted shows a development in the deception method. In this case, instead of using a compromised website, we're now using LLM models to deliver the deception. Whereas now what we're seeing is a change in the information harvested, or essentially the execution method. Whereas we had the malware delivery previously, and now we're harvesting those login credentials. And I really just want to highlight that to show more latest developments around this ClickFix method and why it's so prevalent and one to be on everyone's radar. Ivan, is there anything else notable about this attack chain to you?
Yeah, like you said, this is another ClickFix variation. And with this ConsentFix, the attackers can basically bypass passwords and MFA, and they immediately have command line access to an individual's Microsoft account. So once they paste that account, they essentially have full access. And from the user's perspective, it kind of feels like one of those verified that you're human types of pages. But behind the scenes, the threat actor now has access to do whatever he wants with your Microsoft account. So this is definitely likely to become another attack venue for threat actors looking to use ClickFix, and the victim never knows anything happened, and there was no brute force, no password attempts, no multi-factor. So definitely one that I can see becoming a little more popular as well.
Yeah, I agree. Ivan, probably a lot of overlap with the last news story, but what can organizations do to defend themselves against ConsentFix here?
Yeah, so there's a few things that organizations can do. In addition to the previous things I mentioned, I would also say that you should always never copy and paste any login URLs or anything into any other website. So be very careful whenever a website asks you to paste any information on it. If a page does ask you for that information, stop, go to the original or the official website, and then in that official website, you can try to log in or fix that issue. But be very cautious of any page that's asking you to paste information in there, such as your URL, or it could even be some information on your computer. And then for organizations also, you can monitor for unusual Azure command line interface sign-ins, such as any new IPs, any odd times for sign-ins, and any unexpected permissions.
As you've kind of mentioned twice now, that end users being careful around the copy paste, I would even take that a step further and say that end users should have a red flag if something is telling them on the web to copy and paste. And if I was in senior leadership in an organization, that is one critical thing that I would make sure my end users are aware of right now, either via phishing training or emails or et cetera, is that when they see that instruction to copy paste, they treat it as a red flag, they slow down, and they really start to think about what they're doing and what they're putting into their computer.
Shadow Talk is brought to you by ReliaQuest, the global leader in AI cybersecurity. ReliaQuest helps enterprise cybersecurity teams contain threats in minutes with its agentic AI security operations platform, Grey Matter. ReliaQuest makes security possible for the most trusted enterprise brands in the world. Learn more at ReliaQuest.com.
Next up in the second half, we want to highlight some of the top cybersecurity risks that organizations are going to face during the holiday season, ultimately describing how organizations can defend themselves. Opening up to you, Ivan, why are the holidays such a difficult time for organizations to defend?
Yeah, December and Q4, they have always been a very busy time for threat actors, and that creates challenges for organizations. It's also the perfect time to cause disruptions, post stolen data, extort companies, and launch campaigns, because many security teams, they're going to be on holiday breaks, and they're going to have skeleton crews during the holidays. And for many industries, there is an even lower tolerance for downtimes. And that kind of makes it the perfect time for threat actors to strike. So that's why it can be a challenging time, because we do have those skeleton crews, and threat actors are highly active during that time period.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, you know, it really highlights that the skeleton crews create thin defenses. But an element for conversation here, and a thought that I've had from back in my incident response days, is how do the organizations actually handle the holiday break, in the sense of, if all of our employees are on vacation, that includes our security teams as well as our standard employees, there's also a likelihood to be less noise in the logs, as well as the false positives generated through alerts. So not only do we have lightened security teams, we also have the potential to have lightened security information for our security teams to go through as far as alerts and logs themselves. So I asked the question, are their defenses really thin, or are their defenses actually a bit heightened because there's less false positives for them to weed through and to find those detections? And I think it really comes down to the organization itself, right? And what noise are you generating on a regular basis, and where does it come from? So for example, is that organizations, a lot of their false positives coming from the day-to-day activity of your workers? In that case, you would likely have the drop-off. But is a lot of that noise coming from your customer base, right? Because if it is, the drop-off will likely not be there during the holidays, and instead, as Ivan mentioned, potentially even peak during the holidays. So it's give and take, and it's going to be around what that organization has. I would also kind of highlight too, does an organization understand the current volume of security alerts they have on a day-to-day basis before the holidays? And then how is that going to be affected into the holidays? Do they have the manpower around those alerts to handle that information flow? Something you might want to take into account as we get ready to go on holiday breaks here.
Yeah, those are really great points. And things to also be on the watch out for is different types of phishing campaigns. For example, threat actors, they like to launch campaigns using lures, including things like personal shopping and holiday plans. So it's likely that we're going to see phishing emails disguised as fake surveys, bonus notifications, fake shipping alerts, last-minute gift deals. And these are kind of designed to catch people off guard during this really busy time. And a lot of these may come as text messages, such as smishing attacks, and delivered through search engine optimization. So that's a few things that I would say to watch out for when it comes to phishing.
Yeah, that's a great call out there. And one thing I want to double down on is going to be those fake PTO, payroll, bonus emails, phishing emails that are going to go out to employees. Kind of like we discussed with the decreased security team presence, there's also going to be a decreased presence in the people who can verify those requests, right? So the financial members of the team or the managers who can verify if a fake PTO email or bonus email is legitimate or not. And ultimately, some of the instructions I would make sure my team knows is to wait until after the holidays, till everyone's back in office and we can communicate easier in person or through those meetings to verify those things, because those points of contact are just not going to be there or limited with the holiday hours. Ivan, you also mentioned text-based phishing. Was there anything notable recently campaign-wise around text-based phishing?
One thing that was recent and allegedly happened in November was the Shiny Hunters Lapsus or Scattered Lapsus Hunters threat group. Apparently, they breached a company called Mixpanel using SMS phishing, and now they're extorting a lot of their victims through that they found through that breach. So that's also something to watch out for. They're sending a lot of these emails, and allegedly it's coming from this one breach. But yeah, we definitely can expect to see a rise in phishing, such text-based phishing, over the next few weeks, because that's usually threat actors will adapt their campaigns to be holiday themed. We've seen that in the past. It kind of catches users off guard because they may be calm down during the holiday season. They're not thinking about work. They're not thinking about security. And they see like, oh, this great deal just popped up on my phone. I'm going to click on it. Or maybe I'm expecting a package and I just got a notification that there's a missing package and they click on it. So that's how they can catch people off guard during the holiday season.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting example of Shiny Hunters having a successful campaign leading into the holiday season, something we'll likely see extend into the breaks and New Year. So ransomware is another big threat, Ivan. Why is ransomware such a big threat during the holidays?
Yeah, December specifically has been one of the most active months for ransomware the past few years. Last year in December, we saw a record number of victims posted to ransomware leak sites. It was actually the biggest number we've ever seen in a single month. Over 600 companies posted to ransomware websites in last December. So this could be due to a variety of reasons. One of them could be that ransomware groups are gaining access weeks before, and they're waiting for the time to strike, which is during that holiday season, Christmas, the New Year's, etc. But maybe they could also have conducted these attacks way before, but they're waiting until the holiday season to leak these victims, because that gives them less time to react. It puts more pressure on them when their resources might be a little tight. Either way, the goal is the same. These ransomware groups, they want to maximize the impact of their attacks, and the holiday season is sometimes the perfect time for them to pull the trigger.
Yeah, that's very true. And to give some context to that, in early December, the ransomware group Quillen, one of the top ransomware groups currently, publicly claimed responsibility for an attack against MrChristmas.com, which is a well-known U.S. advertising and marketing company. Again, just showing that things are trending into December, and also having an eye towards the holidays, specifically in advertising and marketing data, that which is now held by a ransomware group. So it's interesting that you mentioned the surge of numbers last year being the highest volume we had seen yet. And I know that there is some debate online around whether these groups are holding on to a lot of these data sets and just mass release them at the end of the year. But many of the top groups, as we see, have a steady flow month after month. So I don't think there's an exact answer here, but I'm curious what your take on that, Ivan, is as to the volume and why we're seeing it trend towards December.
Yeah, like I said, it could be a couple different reasons. It could be that they're waiting to make these posts to post it all during the holiday season to make the most impact. Could be that they're also just waiting to strike during that season, because that is a good time to cause a disruption, because there's less people on deck to fix that disruption, and less of, let's say, management to make the decisions of what they should be doing now, or should they be paying the ransom. People are going to feel more of a rush to actually make these decisions during that season. So that can be a good time to launch these campaigns. And then you also have groups like the Clop ransomware group, that they're very well known for targeting third-party vulnerabilities and etc., such as file transfer software. And what can happen is they've planned these campaigns for months, and they decide when they want to pull the trigger. So maybe they've had this vulnerability campaign that they've been preparing for months, and they're waiting for the perfect time to strike. And then they think, like, okay, the day before New Year's, that's the time to strike. So the day when there's the least security people working, maybe that's the perfect time to strike for them. So they can pick the most inconvenient time for us to strike, and that's for them the most convenient time.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, what's most likely to get them those ransomware payments and those extortion payments, which is what they're really looking for. And we've certainly seen that the top groups take considerable information into account around those organizations, such as financial flows, as well as organizational structure, to understand when the time is to pressure them for that extortion. So wrapping everything up, how do organizations defend themselves against these phishing and ransomware holiday threats?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. Preparation really is the key. So make sure that your emergency tree call up is up to date and tested. So make sure that also your backups are recent, offline, and restorable. And always good to do a quick test to make sure that you can recover during the holidays. Another thing to be on the lookout for, like I mentioned, is third party. So tidy up that third-party access, audit any vendor accounts, VPNs, enforce least privilege and MFA, and also make sure that you have the emergency contacts needed to pull up, especially for any third parties that you use. And finally, also security awareness. We've been talking about ClickFix this whole time, so be very careful when it comes to copy and pasting any information, such as URLs or codes into websites. Be very skeptical of any messages or emails that you get regarding shipping, returns and bonuses, PTO messages. So always verify everything through an official channel, and don't click on any links or scan any QR codes. So be cautious of everything, double verify everything, and that can go a long way to protect against these social engineering attacks.
Those are all great recommendations. I'm going to double down on that test your call tree recommendation and relate it back to my personal experience in incident response. where it is surprisingly often how a lot of these call trees have an outdated and offline number, or somebody who no longer works at the organization as one of the escalation points in their call trees. And it's really critical that we go through right now and verify before everyone's out of the office, and we need to alert people, and we're fumbling to find the right thing. So please make sure we're testing those things. In closing, I want to say thank you to Ivan for joining us today and providing your wisdom and expertise. I want to say thank you to our listeners for joining us for another year as we close out 2025 and spending your valuable time with us. As a reminder, all links to the reports we covered are in the link tree below. We'll see you again back in the new year. I hope everyone has a happy holidays and a happy new year, and take care. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Shadow Talk. If you'd like to get in touch, we're just an email away. You can send your questions to shadowtalk@reliaquest.com. Don't forget to subscribe so you can get next week's episode delivered direct to your podcast platform of choice. And we really appreciate it if you can rate and review Shadow Talk wherever you listen. It will make a huge difference and help us reach new listeners. We'll be back next week with another episode of Shadow Talk, your weekly cybersecurity news and threat research podcast made for practitioners by practitioners.